Well, people, this is San Sulaiman again, and then we'll be covering the arteries of the thorax, and we'll begin with the internal thoracic artery, and we're gonna explain this the Vampire Diaries themed. Okay, 1864 is the year in which Stefan and Damon Salvatore was born. Anyway, let's continue. Okay, so the internal thoracic artery is an artery that begins from the first part of the subclavian artery 1 inch above the medial or sternal endoclavicle. Great. So the subclavian artery is a branch from the left subclavian from the arch of the aorta, and the right subclavian is a branch from the brachiocephalic trunk. But anyways, okay, the first part of subclavian artery gives me the internal thoracic artery. The internal thoracic artery begins 1 inch above the medial or sternal and a clavicle. Then it descends, as we can see here. Let me remove the outline. Okay, it descends behind the sternal and the clavicle. Okay, and it enters the thorax through the thoracic inlet. And then it descends behind the upper 6 coastal cartilages, as we can see here. That's the coastal cartilage, and it continues here to be the rib. Coastal cartilage continues here to be the rib. I tried to demonstrate that. So again, it continues, it passes behind the upper 6 coastal cartilages. By the way, that's number 6. Okay, but I didn't draw the ones in between. And it passes behind the upper 6 coastal cartilages in the intercostal spaces in between, as you can see here. Okay, the space between the internal thoracic artery or the internal mammary artery and the sternum, the lateral endosternum, is 1/2 inch, but not to ruin anything. Okay, it then it ends in the 6th intercostal space, that one. Okay, it gives me 2 branches, as we can see them here. One goes and continues with the rest of the costals, okay, here, and one goes to the stomach in. So the superior epigastric, it says the same thing, epigastric. Gastric means stomach. Okay, and I'll leave what's that spam as a surprise. Anyway, okay, so superior epigastric. That's not an acronym you shouldn't use. You should write in the exam superior epigastric, by the way. I'm just writing that to save time. And here, that's the musculophrenic artery. Great. So again, origin of the internal thoracic artery. Let's just remove those things, yeah. The internal thoracic artery begins 1 inch above the sternal endoclavicle. It passes firstly behind the sternal endoclavicle or medial end whatsoever, passes into the thoracic inlet behind the upper 6 coastal cartilages and the intercostal spaces in between. Okay, ends in the 6th intercostal space, giving me musculophrenic and the superior epigastric. For the relations of the internal thoracic artery, they're so easy actually. First thing, we're going to talk about what's in front or what's superior to it. And I just mentioned most of them except 2. So the first thing I said was it enters the thoracic inlet, passes behind the medial endoclavicle. So the first thing is the medial or sternal endoclavicle. And then it goes 1/2 inch from the lateral aspect of the sternum, or the lateral border of sternum, behind the upper 6 intercostal spaces. So the second thing is the upper 6 intercostal spaces. And I said the and the innervating and the upper 6 coastal cartilages, and I then said behind the innervating intercostal spaces. Oh, what does the intercostal spaces occupy? Yes, the intercostal muscles. So behind the internal intercostal muscle and the anterior intercostal membrane. Hey, why didn't you say external intercostal muscle? If we remember here, the external intercostal muscle, it ended at the costochondral junction and continued here as the anterior intercostal membrane. And the artery is 1/2 inch from the sternum, which here occupies the anterior intercostal membrane. Behind it, there's the internal intercostal muscle. Okay, so again, the relations. First thing, the sternal and superior, of course, sternal and clavicle, upper six coastal cartilages, intercostal muscle, and the anterior intercostal membrane. Okay, there are two things left. What are they? The phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve and the brachiocephalic vein. So to demonstrate that, let me change the color. The brachiocephalic vein goes, there are two, okay, from lateral goes again here to with that one, and they make the superior vena cava, which enters the right atrium of the heart. And here, that's the arch of the aorta. Okay, which gives then the subclavian, which goes like that, and then gives me the internal thoracic. Okay. So the first thing is the brachiocephalic veins for the right side and the left side, and the phrenic nerve. Phrenic nerve begins from C3, 4, 5. I'm gonna leave that and leave it. Not a big deal. Okay. C3, 4, and 5. And it like passes here. Remember, it was in front of the hilum of the lung, so that's if that's the hilum of the lung, the phrenic nerve was passing here. Great. Okay. Passes in front of the hilum of the right lung, but I don't want to make you get mixed up. Great. For the posterior aspect, it was passing there was the, who's that cute? That's the apex of the lung. Okay, I ruined it, but okay. Okay, the lung apex, which is covered by the parietal pleura behind it. I even highlighted it. I didn't color it right as the rest, because I want to show you that the internal thoracic artery is superficial to it. Great. For the side relations, here there are two vena comitants in the lower part. These vena comitants, by the way, I drew this superficial. I remember that I drew it superficial. I have no clue what happened, but okay. Okay, so these two vena comitants, they united together, giving me the internal thoracic vein. So for the lower part, there are the two vena comitants of the internal thoracic artery, which then unite to give me the internal thoracic vein on the medial aspect, of course. Great. And then there is something called the parasternal lymph nodes, as we can see here. It's still medial to it, and para means beside. Remember the paratracheal lymph node. Para means beside. I'm sorry. Okay, I just didn't get enough sleep, so I'm sorry if I got mixed up. So again, the superficial relations. First thing, sternal and clavicle. Then intervening intercostal spaces, which occupy the internal intercostal and the anterior intercostal membrane, and the brachiocephalic artery, brachiocephalic vein, and then the phrenic nerve. The phrenic nerve from C3, 4, and 5, and it passes in front of the hilum of the lung. Where's the hilum of the lung? Here's the trachea, getting here, and that's the hilum, cardiac notch and stuff. Here, it passes in front of it here, but I don't want to get mixed up nor ruin the drawing. Okay. We also have the upper 6 coastal cartilages here. Great. These are the superficial relations. For the posterior relations, it's the lung apex and the parietal pleura covering it. And for the side relations, okay, on both sides of the artery of the lower part, there were two vena comitants that united together, giving me one internal thoracic vein on the medial side. There were some parasternal lymph nodes. Okay. Now watch out. There's a spam. Oh, what are you saying? Spam. Oh, spam. S-P-A-M. Oh, I remember these were the branches of the internal thoracic artery. Before I cover the branches, first with an S, I just mentioned it, dude. It's the superior epigastric artery. Superior epigastric artery is one of the terminal branches of the internal thoracic artery. And P actually is like for 3 branches. First thing are the 3 perforating branches. For the intercostal spaces, number 2, 3, and 4. For 2, 3, and 4 intercostal spaces, it gives me some perforating branches to pierce those. Watch. This is the intercostal, internal, and the anterior intercostal membrane. And that cutie, who's that cutie? I want you to memorize it. Who's that? Oh, I remember that was the pectoralis major muscle. Let me again increase the font if you didn't remember that cutie. Again. Now, who's that? That's the pectoralis major muscle. So it pierces the internal intercostal, the anterior intercostal membrane. The internal intercostal is underneath, of course, and the pectoralis major to give me space to get to supply the in the second, third, and fourth intercostal spaces to supply the medial aspect of the mammary gland that is here. Medial aspect. Okay, this is why it corresponds here to the anterior intercostal membrane, internal intercostal muscle underneath, and the pectoralis major muscle here. Great. And then number P, letter P again. So that's the first P. Second P is for the pericardiaco-phrenic. Pericardiaco is for pericardium. Phrenic means diaphragm. So it's for the pericardium. Let's remove those stupid things. Okay. Pericardiacal. Pericardiacal means for the pericardium. Phrenic means for the diaphragm. Of course, it's not going to supply the pericardium and the diaphragm without giving the pleura. Remember it that way. So pericardiacal phrenic supplying the pericardium, the diaphragm, and the parietal pleura. And then P, again, P is for pericardial, sternal, and mediastinal branches. So it gives the mediastinum, the area between both lungs, if that's a lung. I need a color that is frustrating. Oh, I knew it. Okay. Okay, if that's a lung, and that's the other lung, that area is the mediastinum. So it gives the mediastinum, okay, and it gives the pericardium, that is in the middle mediastinum, and the sternal, of course. It's not gonna leave the sternum lonely, right? So again, to remember, S, superior epigastric. One of the two terminal branches, it goes to the abdomen, no problem. And then P, perforating branches. Okay, and they arise in the upper 6 spaces. They perforate the internal intercostal muscle, anterior intercostal membrane, pectoralis major muscle, and in the second, third, and fourth spaces to supply the medial part of the mammary gland. Okay, and then P again for the pericardiaco-phrenic. Pericardiacal gives the pericardium, phrenic the diaphragm, besides the parietal pleura, and then pericardial, sternal, and mediastinal, anything that is in between both lungs. Pericardial, sternal, and mediastinal branches. A is for the anterior intercostal arteries. Anterior intercostal artery, it gives it for the upper 6 spaces. It gives 2 per each space. These 2 anastomoses with the posterior intercostal artery that is corresponding to it, and the collateral branch of the posterior intercostal artery. So for each branch, the internal intercostal gives here, one here, and one here. Okay, it gives 2 branches of anterior intercostal per each intercostal space. Okay, so again, anterior intercostal branches, 2 for the upper 6 intercostal spaces that run along the upper and lower border of that space to anastomose with the corresponding posterior intercostal and the collateral of the posterior intercostal. And then M is for the, I just mentioned it, musculophrenic dudes. M is for the musculophrenic artery, which is one of the 2 terminals, passing behind the 7th. I even drew that. Look. Let's just remove those stupid things again. Okay. I made it, there's a dotted line to illustrate that it's behind, goes behind, and it continues the course of the internal intercostal. What does that mean? Oh, it gives 2 per each intercostal space from the beginning of the 7th intercostal space. Okay, you know, the anterior intercostal spaces are not complete. We have the number 11, number 12. They are not complete anteriorly, so we just have 9 anterior intercostal spaces. The internal thoracic gave me the first 6. Now we've got 3 left, which are contained by the musculophrenic artery. Great. It gives also 2 per each space that correspond that anastomoses with the corresponding posterior intercostal and the collateral of it. So again, branches, there's the word spam, S for the superior epigastric, P pericardial, mediastinum, and sternal, P again, perforating 2, 3, and 4 for the medial part of the memory, perforating the internal anterior intercostal, and then the pectoralis major, P again, pericardiaco-phrenic for the pericardium diaphragm, and a pleural, parietal, of course. A anterior intercostal, 2 per each for the upper 6 spaces, 1 from above, 1 below, the anastomose with the corresponding posterior intercostal, and the collateral of the posterior intercostal. M is the musculophrenic, which continues to give me the last 3 intercostal spaces, from 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 1 above, 1 below, and the anastomose with the corresponding posterior intercostal. So if you want to have a quick recap, again, begins the internal thoracic artery. Internal thoracic artery begins 1 inch above the medial endoclavicle, external endoclavicle, as a branch from the first part of the subclavian artery. It enters behind the medial endoclavicle, half an inch from it goes into the thoracic inlet, and it descends behind the upper 6 costal cartilages, half an inch from the lateral border of sternum. Okay, it ends in the 6th intercostal space to give me the musculophrenic, the one that goes behind the 7th, 8th, and 9th rib, and then in the superior epigastric goes to the abdomen and stiff. That's the course. The relations superficially, I just mentioned the medial end of clavicle or sternal, no problem. Brachiocephalic veins, the phrenic nerve in front of the hilum of the lung, mediastinal. We have the upper 6 costal cartilages, as we can see them here. Okay, and the last thing is the intervening intercostal spaces that occupy the internal intercostal muscle and the anterior intercostal membrane. The deep relations, those are so easy. That's the apex of the lung and the parietal pleura covering it. What about the side relations? That's still easy. There are 2 vein accommodants surrounding the internal thoracic artery from the lower part. They then unite, making an internal thoracic vein on the upper part, and it's medial. And then there are some peristernal lymph nodes. For the branches, it's the word spam, S, superior epigastric, B, pericardiaco-phrenic, pericardial, mediastinal, and sternal, B again, perforating. A is the anterior intercostal, M is the musculophrenic. Best of luck. This was Selma with you, and I hope I was beneficial.